So I'll try to speak the least amount because everybody's actually interested in hearing about the work and Seongmin's practice, but I'll just sort of throw out these questions through the talk. And I hope everyone did get to see the show and it's all around us. Those who are going to see this on a recording won't be able to see it the way we will, but and I hope you've all been really enchanted by it. I am a curator, but most of my training was pre-20th century work. So I have an implicit bias when I look at modern and contemporary things to think about the links with sort of historical and traditional practice. But Seongmin, your work is really great because I know you are also thinking about those things. So it's not just my bias, but it's actually there. And so I wanted to show a comparison of one of Seongmin's works here that's on display it's a detail of a 2-panel screen. It's a 10-panel screen, but it's 2 panels of a 19th century munbangdo that are showing books. And I would like you to maybe talk about the relationship of and what you think about historical and traditional works and in relation to your own work.
To briefly talk about my background, I was trained in ink painting tradition for a long time in Korea, and then I immigrated to US and studied multidisciplinary art, and also sort of explored a lot of different art forms from minimalism to expressionistic. Gestural expressionism, and also incorporating a lot of science and technology ideas. And at one point, I took back this traditional representational painting from my tradition and began to paint again from more site-specific minimal installations back then. Going back to the tradition, the paintings, I believe it's my minimalistic interpretation of those chakadu piece, especially, and I found very while the minhwa has a lot of bold and loud BG elements going on in minhwa, I found very serene beauty in that specific chakadu piece. I sort of simplified and and to create those minimalistic painting, and those are my painting artworks back then 20 years ago, and you can see sort of connections to how my old practice inspired. Can you go back to how my old practice go back to more? So this old practice has its own connections to my current painting practice.
Great. And as you were saying, it's funny that you said it's a simplifying because at the same time, your paintings are very complex. So I just wanted to make another comparison with one of the paintings you're seeing on top is a 19th century tekgori or tekkado that has the different bookshelves, and you're seeing some of those elements in Seongmin's painting here on the bottom. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about perspectives and this idea that you're engaging with different kinds of perspectives.
In terms of the perspective, I used dual perspective here. As I used 2 different perspectives to depict a different part of the painting. You can go back. This is in this painting. There are a lot of narratives and going on here, and the centerpiece was sort of inserted in between this split bookcase, and there's a lot of drama going on with this diagonal lines and wavy, distorted structural lines that depicts the chakadu, the bookcase, and the center. The ink painting element, the mountains emerging from the background. So while there are a lot of drama going on, it's sort of easier to understand that perspective without the centerpiece. So I created the next one without the centerpiece to just give a little more clear understanding of how I used these two different perspectives. So there are two different vanishing points. One vanishing point locates behind the picture plane, and which defines the area with the matte Asian painting, matte materials, which was depicted with the Asian techniques and material. And then there's another vanishing point located in front of the picture plane, which defines the area with the fluorescent paint. And there naturally these two their diagonal lines converging toward these two different the viewpoint naturally shapes this diamond-shaped space, which I call sort of nexus. It's a portal that connects two different worlds with two different perspectives that from there I wanted to talk about interconnections and openness and coexistence. That is something that we need to pay attention. I want my audiences to pay attention to understand what's going on in this painting.
So it's really great about this kind of multiple vanishing points because that existed in the late Chosun painting genre. And so this was done by another scholar saying, you know, for the width of the folding screen, there was multiple vanishing points that were being implemented. And so I think it's quite interesting that you've already incorporated that on a very different level with also matching it with different kinds of materials. Because this type of painting that came into Chosun was very much influenced by Western painting, as you well know, the whole linear perspective and things. But I feel like you're taking all of those kinds of combinations and also then inserting your own kind of very much your contemporary insertions. Like you said, you use the word insertion for particularly the front, but it's very interesting about the use of materials, that you're aligning certain kinds of materials that we often think with tradition with one perspective and then using the fluorescent paint, which is completely something that is new and an addition in there. So
and also to add
Yes,
one more too, can you go back to that? So this diagram really reminds me of those vertical landscape painting with all moving perspective as a high ground, the middle ground, and the lower ground. As we used traditionally, like historically, we used the moving perspective to depict the natures, and I didn't really think about and understood this painting in this way, and it was like really stunning to see these images and really to understand how these old painters used and manipulated this linear perspective from Renaissance period and use that on their own way to present their own artistic way.
Right. Yeah. And I think we're going to just go and see a video of a time-lapse video with the light changing.
Okay. So for this painting, I juxtaposed with traditional matte finish Asian paint. I used the luminous fluorescent paint, obviously, and then I exaggerated that luminosity by using the UV lights, and even I programmed that UV light with the Arduino so that it gives some notion of so the intensity of the light changes so as the luminosity of the fluorescent colors. So it's sort of painting installation, interdisciplinary painting installation, incorporating technologies, and I wanted to have some innovative way to present two-dimensional painting with the notion of physical time without the moving images in there. So from that aspect, I also can sort of deepen these narratives and pictorial depth, and it really creates interesting dynamics and relationship between this luminescent part and the matte area, and also creates sort of some illusions in our eyes between these two relationships, and a very interesting color theory, color relativity theory going on there. So it's really fun to explore that relationships, and I really want to develop more of this work.
No, I think it's really interesting that your insertion is sort of a pigment that reacts to light, because so much of Western illusionistic painting, not only is it about perspective and aligning the linear perspective with the diagonals, but it's also about trying to give volume to things. And usually to create a sense of volume, you're dealing with creating shading, and you're sort of trying to make it seem like the light is bending or darkening or lightening on this level. And so that kind of illusionistic imagery also is about the idea of depicting kinds of ways that light falls on objects or on humans or whatever it might be. And you're now inserting a paint that is basically also this kind of insertion of light and dark. But as you said, if without the UV, depending on the UV intensity, that lightness in the paint is stronger, and then sometimes it's also quite invisible, right? So there's also, again, this kind of, I think it's, I don't think you were thinking about light in that same way, but illusionistic painting is also about trying to create different representations of light, or how light is being formulated into a painting's subject. So that, I think, is really interesting, that you're taking that concept in a sort of a very different place, but still working with this sense of how do you show light, how do you insert light, how do you manipulate light, and with paint, and then with UV light, which I think is really interesting, again, with your kind of technological new direction that you're taking.
Yeah, so my painting practice, fundamentally, it's very obvious that I began from the tradition, but I always try to find a way to incorporate new technologies and new visual languages to create. In the end, that I want to create something that really speaks to the people in 21st century in the contemporary context. So that's how I interpret and value my own tradition and make it more meaningful.
But then again, I guess in a kind of going back, but also talking about materials, you were saying in the center here, you inserted what would be more ink paintings. So here, the mineral pigments and the polychromatic pigments are in what we would think of as part of the tekori, bookcase realm. And then you've inserted this mountain structure in the middle, like you said, that you were sort of disrupting and inserting it. But this is using similar but not the same kinds of materials. Particularly, you're using ink and brush, and going back to another kind of. So during the Joseon period, you had both of these kind of traditions. You had the ink painting tradition, but you also had this polychrome tradition. And now you kind of melded that.
Yeah.
If you could just talk a little bit about that.
So to give a little more background in terms of that, correct me if I'm wrong, from historical point of view. So I believe the ink we have, it's very two different genres that we should sort of understand what's going on, which is different from what is Western tradition. So ink painting was more conceptually and philosophically developed and sponsored by those scholar painters, which was done more intuitive and spontaneous gestural way on the raw paper, using more textures and characteristics of these water sensitive papers, and the polychrome painting, the color painting, was created more by these professional coat painters, and which requires more elaborated process and very labor-intense process that requires like different mindsets and different a setup for painting versus the ink painting requires a lot of body movement and intuitive emotional response to the material versus the color painting, like really set up on the table and really apply the layer by layers. So and also those court painters were socially sort of lower. Social rank was lower than scarlet painters. So I believe the ink painting was more regarded as a high art, and then these polychrome paintings were regarded as more craft and painting with some of kind of lack of philosophical depth as they as scarlet painters wish it to be. So I in my painting I sort of express it's sort of segregated genre, and I kind of wanted to combine those two different genres together in my paintings to talk about the unification, and in terms of the process, it requires a whole different technical process. So it really in a way, it's challenging to me. I have to begin with this centerpiece with the ink painting. Oh, at first I have to plan everything perfectly out, and then I have to work on this centerpiece with this mindset for the ink painting, and then take pause. I cannot work on those same thing on the same day. Those things, two different genres, two different styles on the same day, and then prime the paper and apply the colors layer by layers, which takes a long time. So that's sort of challenging way, but it was also fun to combining all these two different artistic styles, and yeah.
That's really fascinating because I haven't ever heard someone talk about sort of the, in one sense, not only the material. Everyone always talks about the styles. You know, obviously polychrome painting is different, and ink painting is, as you said, often considered closer to calligraphy. It's very gestural, or can be, although it can be quite meticulous as well. And I think often people think this is all sort of ink and brush or mineral pigments, but similar in terms of its materiality, in terms of, but so I've never really actually heard anyone speak about it as being, you know, so different stylistically, and even some of it because of the materials, the mineral pigments acting differently than ink, that you actually have to take a pause, that you have to stop, and you can't just go from one to the other, that there is this whole kind of interior process that you have to do to be able to execute in color versus ink, or at different points. And I'm assuming that the fluorescent pigment probably is also different in how it acts and how you have to manipulate that. So I do think you're sort of giving us an insight into something that I actually never had thought about, in terms of setting yourself and being able to, you can't just jump around and do this, that, and the other. And there is very much an internal sort of process and regulation that you have to do, and a preparation, I guess, is probably a better word. So thank you for that. Now we're going to we're going to go to a different, sort of, I think, a newer phase that you're looking at. And actually, because I'd seen the images first before I saw the installation, and I know that it's around, so even just looking at the image, I knew it was around a plug because that's an outlet, excuse me. But I don't know why I didn't put it together until I got here to see that the outlets are very low. So that your installation is very low to the ground, or it was at a, I was kind of looking around up for it. I was like, oh, where are these cutouts? And then I was like, oh, duh, they're on they're on the lower part. And so I was thinking it'd be interesting to talk about what you're doing here and this new avenue that you're going to.
Yes, it's new, but before this, I've been working on this vinyl projects for from the beginning of the pandemic. At that pandemic sort of gave me some outlet that I want to try something different in order to have some breakout from my older traditions. So that's the time that I began to work on this new piece, and and also I took the direct inspiration from Korean 문자도, which is another genre, another part of the minhwa painting, and using some window pieces, using this kind of new commercial materials, which was sort of a foundation. On top of that, I sort of create this installation going on here. So going back to this piece, the both work uses same technical process. I began from this analog-based paintings, and then I digitized them using Adobe softwares, and also transform them into this reproducible installations using commercial materials. So I have whole theme, the sort of frame theme going on this, especially both inside and outside. And I wanted to sort of use the frame, the notion of frame, the function of frame, to kind of deviated from the more the stereotype, the function of the frame. I wanted to sort of give a little in order to just give a little more to the frame. When we think of the frame, we frame to preserve some valuable objects or precious memory, and deviated from that stereotype, the function of the frame. I wanted to give some more attention to some unnoticed objects or concepts that we kind of neglected in our daily life. So for that work, I wanted to glorify these mundane but essential objects by giving this gold frame with elaborate designs around it.
It's funny that you're saying these are mundane objects, which and when you see them installed in this space right here, you do it is quite low. Again, it wasn't at the height that I would expect an art object to be. And as you said, we frame things that we think are precious, or we frame things to give it a new context, or outside context. But then when you're just talking about value, and then looking at the image here, sort of closer, I was thinking, electricity is so important to all of our lives right now, right? Like, what would we do if we couldn't plug in and recharge our phones, our computers, and all of these things? And so seemingly this mundane outlet is also come like this big source of our own livelihood in so many ways. So you're framing something quote unquote mundane, but actually highlighting also something interesting. And then I know you have this sort of certificate of ownership, and I was wondering if you can explain some of that.
Okay, so while I was working on this vinyl projects, the question came up to me was, oh my gosh, it's a lot of work. It's already a lot of work to reach to that point of the finish it, the pre-drawing before the digitization. And then after that process, it's another lot of work in digital way, and also producing and finding those resources to reproduce those things. Sometimes I do it, I spend my own time and effort. So I got to find some way to pay off my time and efforts in many different ways. If it's not fun, but also I have to find some meanings to it. So I wanted to expand this as an art project. So I created limited editions for sales, and at the same time, I wanted to expand this as an art project that participants can sort of bring this into their own space and then give attention and installing themselves on those mundane but essential objects in their living space, and participating, engaged more with these art projects, and enjoy this beautiful artworks in their space as well. And I certify that ownership of the experience and the participation. That is sort of the way that I found sharing this project more with the public, while keeping the integrity of the artworks. It's an artwork. It's not just a sticker.
Right.
It's a sticker.
Right.
So.
No, that's interesting also because, like you said, it's not just this, it's, you've highlighted the labor and the intensive amount of work you said and time that I often think most people take for granted. I would think most think, oh, it is a sticker. This is something you can just put anywhere. You can get it, or it's like those like tattoos that you put on kids or whatever it might be. But being that you said it starts from an original drawing that then you have to manipulate into various different digitized and an actual vinyl print. And I think often most of us take a lot of labor for granted in general. And I think we often think, oh, this is so easy, until somebody has to do it themselves. And then they recognize that it's so, in that sense, not only are you saying that this is an art object, but you're also, I think, highlighting really what labor and time and how we often devalue that because we don't see it ourselves in that way. So,
and also certain portions of this limited edition will be donated to the public sector. So if anyone here is part of the institutions, can reach out to me for the collaboration. It doesn't need any special nice exhibition space, any switch in the public space. Then it can be anywhere.
That's great. And then going about the idea of framing, it made me, seeing those, your sort of newer works, or the framing works, it made me think back to some of the other works that you have that have also an empty center, and this is not created to create a frame, but what is happening here that you can maybe tell us about the insertion of sort of what looks like something could be in the center, but is not.
Okay, the center rectangular part refer to the hyperdimension within. That's the title of the work, which I represent to the notion of the emptiness. And also I wanted I want to leave it open ended, as one can find their sort of emptiness, sort of metaphysical state of mind in their own way, either religious or spiritual or philosophical or scientific way. And I found all from my own space, from all those perspectives. And I also associate that emptiness with the quantum world, the quantum field with constantly moving, interacting, and vibrant energies, and that's a very micro world, but it's a vast space with a lot of energies going on there, and it's this emptiness is the sort of long time subject in my work, and I can sort of simply share this simple work from almost a decade ago, more than a decade ago, which is very obvious, talking about the emptiness and the void. I don't have to add any explanation to it. So the one on the right is the first piece that I began. I used a fluorescent paint. With the UV light. It's basically, without the UV light, white fluorescent paint on white regular paint. So without the UV light, there's nothing. It's just white paint on white. And with this lighting, it's sort of that presence of this inner space, sort of emptiness, sort of emerges. I also used same notion of emptiness to my recent paintings as well.
I'm going to go back one, actually.
Yeah.
What I think is you can't see in this PowerPoint, and you can only really tell, so it doesn't really translate very well in a photo, but you can really see it in the works, is that these are not flat. That there is a three-dimensionality to the actual piece, that there is a depth to it, that, this is not just a flat painting with this kind of emptiness, but there is a very much a three-dimensionality. And when you were saying your first piece with the fluorescent paint, and it was sort of white on white, and so again, without the UV light, you only get one side of it, or you only get one facet of it. And I think a lot of times your work also, because it incorporates not only fluorescent paint, but if you look at it as a two-dimensional image, you miss some of that three-dimensionality that's there. You miss a lot. So again, I think you're always asking us to look again, to like look closer, to question what you're seeing, and there might be more that you can't actually see, and depending on the circumstance or depending on the environment, whether it's dim light, UV light, or you might see something else that wasn't there in a different context. And I think that's always this. You're always sort of kind of bringing us into to question. And you said the word quantum, that you also think really a lot about quantum physics, and you said quantum is a very small word, but anyone says quantum to me, I'm always like, I don't even know what that means. Like, it's not a small word. It's actually quite a big thing. And I think I wanted to now then go to this last group of works that you have, which I think seems to me a little bit of a bridging between both your object of art, the framing work, but also your hyperdimension kind of work, because of this kind of idea of looking and portals. So these two works here that you can see here in the gallery that's installed, looking through, I was wondering if you can ask, what you want to inspire in us, in terms of looking and looking through.
So it's again, this emptiness and void idea is there, even though I don't pay attention a lot on that work. That's really resides there, and then I wanted to bring this frame idea to bring attention to something that we don't notice. We don't notice the sceneries outside and the natures that we look through the windows. So that's sort of the objects or concepts that I want, or landscapes or urban landscapes that I want to pay attention to this work. And that realization sort of has connection to inner emptiness as well. We can notice, kind of be aware of that when we sort of empty ourselves out. That's how I can sort of make connections to the emptiness as well. And yeah.
And when we were talking about your work before, I had mentioned what I found so interesting, that you obviously are using something that's quote unquote maybe more of a Western frame here on the on the left. The left. I'm sorry. And then here, and actually this is the right. And then here on the left, you're showing what we often consider more of a hanging scroll format, and then the mountings that you would find. So in an East Asian painting tradition of a hanging scroll, that kind of traditional framing device, which is the mounting. And what it was struck me right away is that you use one Western frame here for the full window. And here you actually created a pair of hanging scrolls and created sort of two framings in there. And when we talked about that, I asked you if it was really because about the proportionality of if this was the one, instead of it being a pair of scrolls, but just one scroll and then having the mounting in this window format, it wouldn't really work with what we often consider as the proportions for mountings. And so was it just this natural idea that you wanted to keep some of the proportionality, so therefore you made it a double? Or is there something else involved there?
It's basically, that's what it is. It's a characteristics of this scroll, like either horizontally, the vertically long or horizontally long. That's the characteristics. It's a proportions that also made possible or created this idea of emptiness, how we designed the emptiness in those different formats from the Western painting tradition. So it's a very important characteristics. Characteristics, and I wanted to keep it by presenting two different panels to fit into that more Western proportional the window side.
No, and I think you're really speaking to the fact that you obviously understand both traditions quite well, and want to therefore highlight certain kinds of things, but also break away. We often don't just have frames, although I think now more people find frames to be very beautiful. They're more than just the thing to support the object. But that you are making these very intentional choices, recognizing where each of these traditions are coming from, and then incorporating it and being flexible enough to be able to be in dialogue with both traditions on equal footing.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about sacrificing one thing for another, just as your whole practice, I think, and obviously all of your training incorporates both so many, you know, various levels of traditions and aspects, which I think is great.
I think the coexistence and balance is very important element of my work, and I like to sort of present the contrasting elements in a very complementary way, not the contradictory way, and that's also the value that I found in our life as well.
Then I thought we would end with this piece. The largest piece in this exhibition. It's for people who are here in the room. It's right here. And if you could just talk more about it, because I think I think if you just look at it, you can think, oh, it's, again, one of these vinyl cut installations. But then when you talk about all the different details, you recognize really how much more there is than often most of us are perceiving.
So I titled this piece as Inverted Frame, which is very literal, unlike my other works, has more implications. So it's very decorative work with a lot of the ornamentations and with the gold on the black background. So it's really sort of that combination itself is stunning in a way. And I really want to give very clear idea of what the concept is about. That's why I gave very literal title as an inverted frame. So in this work, I basically reversed the location of the ornamentation. So we usually in Western frame, the ornamentation is outside along the outer edge, and the inside has more rectangular, repetitive rectangular shapes to define the object, the paintings inside and the center. But I basically inverted to change the location. So in my designs, that the ornamentation is inside, and then the rectangular frames is outside. So I wanted to invert, reverse what I want to frame. It's the world that we live in, not the object inside. So we are in the frame from that perspective. And I sort of wanted my audience to place themselves inside and looking outside, and I almost forced them to sort of apply my reverse perspective to understand the work and enjoy the work. And for especially this work, I also used a hybrid design. So for the previous two window piece, I placed this Western frames and Eastern frames side by side, and for this one, I sort of incorporated those two elements together, designed as a hybrid design. So the framework of the frame is the Western style, and the four corners of the ornamentation on the four corner, I began from Western motif, and then put the sort of Korean peony flower design inside of the that ornamentation, the center, and also in the center of the horizontal bar, I have this plum blossoms, which is very typical motif in Asian paintings. So they are also integrating each other as one being. So again, I'm talking about how two different contrasting elements are incorporating together, and really talk about the connections as well.
I think what's really interesting about the inverted frame also is that you have this one petal that is falling. Excuse me. And again, you're sort of inserting another kind of unstable element, I think, which I think and not instability in a sense that it's supposed to make people feel unstable, but it's that motion, I think, that you also often refer to, and you see it in your one of your early, when you do the insertion of the mountain, that also has very kind of movement, or so this one feels very static until you see that little pedal, and then it again feels quite like there's movement, or there's like a little bit of instability that, you know, inviting us to look in, but also framing ourselves within it, and so it's not this kind of static way. So I thought that was really a nice element there.
And also to add one more aspect element on this, that is not just the black color that I refer to, it's dark space that I want to create. So it's just, instead of just flat one black color, I meant to have like really deep space in dark.
So I think we'll stop here, but we'll be open for questions, I'm assuming.
Thank you so much for the talk today. I did have a question. I might not have the right art words, but I'll try. I was really struck that you talked about how different it is for you to paint in different mediums with the brush ink versus the polychrome, I think you said. Could you speak a little bit about how it is to work with the vinyl, particularly if you're starting with a drawing in brush, translating it through a computer, and then I assume printing it? What is that process like?
I mean, the process in terms of technicality or my mindset, how I both technicality. Well, to explain a little more detailed process. So once I finished that drawing, which I had to sort of find a way to find the right amount of the details in order to be more efficient in vinyl languages. It cannot be too detailed, and also it can be too simple because I don't want it to be. The vinyl is for the simplicity, and I sort of challenging in a way to give some decorative, elaborate elements in there. So I really have to negotiate between those two lines to be efficient. So I really had to find the right amount of complexity in my original drawing. That's the first step that I sort of found it out. And then scanning and polishing in the digital way, mostly using the for Photoshops and Illustrator, that was more time-consuming work, and the vinyl process is another fun part that I could expand my capacity. Once I build the files, I can really make it large, or like make multiplication projects. So that was really opened up a new possibilities for me. And in terms of the mindset, it's just I'm a very versatile person. I have very diverse educational and background and creative practice. So it's really fun process exploring different mediums and trying to find new languages that I can speak with the new technologies and materials.
So this is a question from my friend who regrettably could not be here today, but she was curious about your use of, or your inspiration behind using fluorescent painting, or fluorescent paint in your work, because for her it kind of seemed to talk to or speak to the idea of the hidden message or the hidden image in paintings or in works of art in general. And so she just kind of was wondering about your inspiration for the fluorescent paints.
So in terms of the fluorescent paint, I just love the paint. Again, with the versatile abilities, and I have versatile personality as well. I really like those matte traditional can be boring for someone, not to me. I love those the painting materials, and at the same time, I love gold and shimmers and the fluorescent, and which was sort of forbidden to use when I was in Korea, enrolled in the traditional art department. So maybe that made me sort of find more opportunity to use those things for my painting. But it took me a while to incorporate these two different natures, two different effects from two different materials. And I guess it took me for like 2 decades to finally incorporate those things.
For your frames, the frames are always raggedy or broken and have chips in them. Why is that? Why was it not perfectly filled?
Are you talking about those some mark on there? I think it's just the depiction of the wooden leftover sort of mark on the original painting that I had as a reference. And also I have to think of this transition from painting with the shading, different shades of the colors and tones, versus this black and white sort of drawing. So I have to find a effective way to depict these details. And while I was working on that process, I really think of these visual languages from wood block print. So how they use this negative and negative, positive black and white images. So it sort of naturally comes out of that transition.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. One is I was intrigued by how perfectly these vinyl pieces fit into where they're sitting now. So I'm curious whether you knew before beginning these works that these would be installed in these specific spots in this specific space, and if you did, if you were given dimensions to work with, and if that's the case, how that kind of collaboration came about.
So that's a very interesting and very good question that I want to share. So when Jay, the director of the space, offered me a show, she also proposed about having my the previous again piece on that large scale installation on a window, something similar to this space here for the world. And okay, I keep that in mind and then see what I can do for it. But when I visited the space, I was thinking a little more creative way, and I just didn't want to have the same things for the space and over again, and I wanted to create something new that speaks and sort of reside in the space as well. So I made multiple visits to the site and really think about what I can do, how I can convert this sort of official and functional space into some artful spaces. So I sort of way to think and utilize the elements what's already there. And when I think of this word fixtures bothered me a lot. That was in the way. Like I just cannot really think of any my existing work look good with those words fixtures. So I just reversed my idea. Why don't I use it? So that's how I began to use those wall fixtures, and then really to compensate that size and the scales, I wanted to have some big, loud pieces for this main wall, and I had to put extra effort to sort of work on that outlet. And the window is another idea that since I have previous experience so installing the piece in the window, how I want to use the window as a part of creating the whole space as an artful place. That's how I came up with the idea and expanding those concepts about the frames.
Thank you. And that actually leads really nicely into my second question, which is about scale. And I imagine these window pieces, and especially this one on the big wall, I can't imagine you like working at scale for these. So your original drawings were smaller than these, right? So
Yeah.
I am wondering whether there were any surprises, whether pleasant or not, when you blew them up and actually saw them in scale in this space.
Well, I measured wrong. So, by huge. So I measured the whole height from the carpet to the ceiling. So I didn't really consider that a board underneath. So that much. It's huge. So I sort of I don't know if you can notice, we sort of figured out how to install the piece. So it's not perfect, but somehow it worked out. Yes, it's a very small drawing. Original painting is very small, and I only painted a little more than half, as the centerpiece is not very symmetrical. And when I blew up, it's there's some tricky parts, but it's also a fun process, and it's also another advantage that using the technologies and these commercial materials, and that like really opened up another like possibilities for me as an installation artist and the public artist as well.
Well, thank you so much, Seongmin and Eleanor, for your wonderful talk.
And thank you. And thank you so much all for coming. I know we all are busy, and I really appreciate your commitment here, and I really appreciate it.